Circle of Life in Jesus' Name, Part 2, Chapter 29. Young Eric and his grandfather ended up heading home and eating lunch there with Shelley and the children. After lunch, Eric Sr. invited young Eric into his study while they digested. "So, young Eric, how are you feeling?" Eric nodded. "I feel fine." "Any more thoughts about what you went through in jail?" "No. I don't want to think about it, really. Last night I was feeling strange, but then Jordan came in my room and the feelings went away." "Can you use a different word besides strange?" Young Eric sighed, shook his head. "What if I say no? Then I'll ask you to try again." He looked down and sighed. "Lonely, maybe?" "That sounds like a question." "Okay, then. Lonely," he said firmly. Eric shook his head. "Not buying it. Try again." "I don't know what else to say. I didn't want to be alone." "Why?" "Granddad, please, can we not just let this go?" "What do you think?" He sighed. "What was the question?" "Why didn't you want to be alone?" Young Eric was silent for several moments. "I guess because I've gotten used to Jordan being around and I miss her when we're not together." Eric Sr. studied his grandson's face, then shook his head. "Try again." "Why?" "Because I know why, and you know why, and it will help you if you just come out and say it." "I don't know why. I don't. If you do, then by all means fill me in," he said sarcastically. "You know, you're right on the verge of being disrespectful, and I'm only going to let that slide because I realize how desperate you are to get out of saying what you don't want to say." Young Eric's eyes moistened, and he shook his head. "I'm sorry." "Okay. I guess I didn't want to be alone because I was feeling..." He stopped, muttered a curse, making his grandfather's brows raise. "Just say it, Eric." He nodded. "I was feeling fear. I was feeling afraid." His grandfather nodded. "Good." "No, Granddad, not good. Ridiculous, emasculating. I was lying in bed, afraid of the dark. I'd been thinking about sleeping with the light on when Jordan opened the door." "Well, it's hard to admit that you're not Superman when your whole life you thought of yourself that way, strong, invincible." "I don't think of myself that way. Haven't I been humble as I train and know that all those men are kicking my butt?" "That humility is compensation, and we've talked about that. But Eric, we, and when I say we, I mean you, need to put this fear into perspective. They put you in a tiny cell in the dark for hours. They also didn't bother to offer any first aid. By the way, they have been called upon to account for both of those things, and the officers are being disciplined." "Great. Now I'll look like a wuss to the rest of the world, too." "It doesn't matter how you look to the rest of the world. It only matters how you feel about yourself. Eric, you've transferred the fear of closed spaces to fear of the dark and brought it straight home and into your own space. You have to separate these things. And Eric, there is nothing wrong with being afraid of something. We all have fears, and it certainly doesn't make you less of a man." "Oh, yeah. So tell me, Granddad, tell me just one time when you were so afraid that you cried. Not afraid for someone else, but for your own self." "Many times. But let me look back into my younger years. The year I met your grandmother was pretty rough. A man who hated me sent 8 guys to beat me up." "That was James or Tommy Crane, right?" "James sent them. Tommy was one of them." "You were afraid of being beat up?" "Well, not really. It was what they did after they beat me up that scared me. They hung me up using duct tape onto the plate that holds a kicking bag. I knew there was no way out and no way to fight. He pulled his belt off from his waist, and I knew I was about to feel real pain, and I had no idea if they intended to hurt me or beat me to death. And I was scared, and it hurt like hell, and the tears ran down my face." "What did you do?" "Well, there was only one thing to do. Pray. And I did." "Why have you guys not told me about this?" "Well, part of that is because it was a very long time ago. Years." Part of that is because it was a very long time ago, years before you were born, and part of that is because we don't like to dwell on negative things, and another part of that is because I was ashamed. Why? Because they were able to best me, because they got to me, due to me forgetting to lock a door. I was distracted. Good grief, Granddad, you can't expect that you could hold your own for a long against 8 guys, and we all get distracted. Eric Sr. smiled. You see the way you immediately jumped to my defense? It's because it seems obvious to you that I was being hard on myself, and I was. I don't feel that way anymore. How long will it take you to stop being so hard on yourself? You're human, young Eric, but even though you are, you're one of the best humans I know. Strong, honorable, hardworking, highly intelligent, and courageous. Yes, courageous. You've been traumatized. You'll get past it. Young Eric didn't know what to say. He sighed deeply. I hope so. I know so. He smiled. There were still other things to address, but this was enough for now. Somewhere between Saturday night and today, young Eric had turned a corner, like Master Foreman had said. Eric figured it had to do with his grandson having to truly fight while he was in jail. He hadn't been worried about accidentally hurting anyone. He'd had to fight for his life. And Eric wasn't sure if he would even address it before the challenge. He'd have to pray about that. You ready to get back to work? Yes, sir. New scene. It's September 30th, Monday afternoon, Sky Nash Studio, Nashville, Tennessee. Taylor and Gabe smiled at each other in the mirror. They liked the outfits chosen for them to wear for their Uptown Funk number. Taylor had on some baggy dance pants, red with all kinds of belts and zippers. They hung low, exposing her navel and her tiny waist. Her top looked like a shiny red shirt that had the bottom ripped away to expose her midriff, and the shoulders ripped away, and the sleeves ripped away. It had sparkles all over it. It was actually sexy in a sloppy sort of way. Her hair was down, and she wore a red ball cap. Gabe had on black baggy pants with the same zipper and belt effect, and ripped-up black T-shirt that showed most of his chest and abs. He had on a black ball cap. They both wore high tops. They left the practice room and headed to the sound stage for the run-through. They'd practiced hard, and the run-through was almost perfect except for a few missed camera cues. They went to change and came back for a run-through of the Don't You Feel Like Crying number with Logan. This time they were dressed in Roomba-type clothing. Taylor wore a sleeveless, flowing, soft pink, shimmery dress. Though the underdress was solid, the rest of the dress was completely see-through. Gabe wore black again, this time dance slacks that sat low on his hips, and see-through black button-down shirt that was not buttoned. Gabe didn't mind it, except for the sprinkling of sparkles on the black shirt. When he asked if he could get a plain black shirt instead, his wishes were immediately granted. Logan's run-through had a few rough spots that were sorted out, and after about 30 minutes they were allowed to go back to the dressing rooms and rest and eat before they had to get ready for the live show. Taylor used the time to make content for Gabe's media. Ricky and Bree touched base with young Eric, and then Ricky grabbed a bottle of water and went to find Logan. His parents weren't here with him, and Ricky didn't want him to feel alone or nervous. He found Logan pacing the halls, and he was obviously nervous. Logan, Ricky said. Logan turned. Uncle Ricky. You starting to feel it? Logan nodded. I'm almost never nervous before I perform, so this is weird. I guess because this could make or break me, singing on national television. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea since I don't have that much experience. Ricky handed the water to Logan. Drink that and let's talk about that experience. I can't even count how many times I've watched you perform. It hasn't been that many. Well, I know when you were in high school, I attended at least 3 performances per year, and I missed several of them. But let's go back further. There was the time in middle school at that talent show, and the solos and the chorus concerts, and then like every week in church, and then 3 other churches asked you to come and sing. You didn't seem nervous then, and you were much younger. Yeah, maybe that's it. I didn't realize then that singing was what I wanted to do for a living. I was just singing for the Lord. Now, like several people have pointed out, it's a huge opportunity for my career and one I could easily blow. Drink, Ricky commanded. Logan took several swallows. Why do you want to sing for a living? Uh, it's what I love to do. Why do you love it? Ricky asked. Search your heart. Why? I guess it's because of those times when I was young and sang in church. I found I could sing in such a way that people said they felt the Spirit move through them when I was singing. I mean, how cool is that? I could feel it, and I was surprised that they could feel what I could feel. And then I realized the times I really felt the Spirit move me when I was singing, those were the times when most people spoke to me after the performance. They would tell me how I moved them. Of course, I knew I wasn't the one moving them. Ricky nodded. But you were the vessel. God was or is using you to bring his Spirit to people. Right, and I get that, and that's cool, and I get that's what I really want to do. But not just sing songs, but sing meaningful songs, ones that can change people's lives. Every song you sing can do that. Cry to Me? It's not a bad song. It speaks to that loneliness that everyone experiences. Well, it almost sounds to me like it's encouraging a woman to turn to another man in her time of need instead of her regular guy. Then why did you sing it at the birthday party? He shrugged. We saw it on social media, and Gabe was singing it, and we thought he could sing it to Taylor fairly well. Okay, that makes sense. But, well, what if you thought of the words in a different way? What do you mean? Well, what if God was saying the words? Logan thought. His eyes lit up. When your baby leaves you all alone and nobody calls you on the phone, don't you feel like crying? Well, here I am, honey. Cry to me. He smiled. Cry to the Lord. Oh, I love it. Ricky nodded. Psalm 18:6. In my distress I called upon the Lord. To my God I cried for help. From his temple he heard my voice, and my cry to him reached his ears. It fits perfectly, don't you think? Logan nodded. It does. And that helps, Uncle Ricky. But what if I mess up? Well, don't concentrate on messing up or being perfect. Focus on bringing the Lord's message to your audience. Is your focus on getting high acclaim or on getting God's message out? You're not in this for the fame. You want to use your talent to spread God's love, right? Yes, sir. So focus on that. Ask God to help you touch the hearts of everyone hearing your voice. Let's do that right now. Eric put his hand on Logan's shoulder and began to pray, and Logan began to relax, and the nerves went away. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen, Ricky finished. Amen, came a deep voice. They looked up to see Toby coming down the corridor with a smile on his face. Jitters? Logan nodded. I was just coming back to check on you, but it looks like your uncle has beat me to it. Ricky smiled. As usual. So, since he's asked the Lord to be with you and help you, that's really all you need, because I know that you, Logan, are going to go far in bringing God to people through your music. Logan nodded. I hope so. I mean, every song I write, it's just a form of worship or preaching. It's a way for me to convey how God makes me feel to others. That's beautiful, Logan, Toby said. Mr. Nash, you know when they're going to speak to me right before I sing? Yes. Do you think I could change what I say? Yes, as long as you don't use profanity and don't go over the 30-second time allotment. Logan nodded. I just want to say that it's God asking the question in my song. Toby smiled. I'll approve it. Do you have the authority to do that? He laughed. Nope, but I have great influence over someone who does. He nodded. So I was about to have him go through some martial art forms to help him to ground, Ricky said. Toby nodded. Great idea. I was going to tell him to run in place. Yours sounds much cooler. He nodded at Logan. And while you're doing that, breathe from the diaphragm. You will instantly relax. New scene. It's still September 30th. It's Monday evening, Keno Estate, Crystal Cove, California. Jojo was just heading up the large circular front steps when he heard another vehicle coming up the long drive. He turned to see a silver sedan with an Uber decal on the front. The car stopped, and Jake stepped out, wearing fatigues and a huge smile. Jojo! Joe ran down the steps and grabbed Jake's hand. Jake, my man, it's so good to see you. He was pulled in for a giant hug, then pulled back and looked into Jake's eyes. You doing okay? Jake nodded. I'm doing great, but missing my girl, my wife. Jojo laughed. Yep, your wife. Isn't that just too crazy? You have a wife. So cool. Even if it does sting me a bit. How's Lena doing? Well, sorry about the sting. Well, sorry, not sorry. And she's doing okay. Before I flew out here today, we spent all day and all last night together in a hotel in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And leaving her again was rough, but she's so freaking strong. And she's moved back in with her parents because her mama's on bed rest with the twins. Jojo nodded. Well, let's go inside and see what's happening with the Kinos. As soon as they entered, Shelley called to them. Hey, guys, we're in the kitchen. Hey, Grandma, Jojo said as he kissed her cheek. Jake also kissed her cheek. Hey, Miss Shelley. She turned and looked at Jake. My, you look so grown up in your fatigues. Jake smiled. Thanks. I didn't have time to change, or the energy. Just wanted to hurry and get here. I'm free until 0800 tomorrow morning. Jeffy came from around the kitchen table and hugged both boys. Hey, guys. Jake, good to see you. You do look very manly in your fatigues. She placed a hand on his face and frowned and pulled it away. So what are you guys doing? Jojo said loudly to the 5 children, all sitting quietly at the table. Hi, Jojo, Angelina said. We are doing our homework. Really? I didn't know you went to school. She giggled. We don't, Nate said with a frown, but Jeffy was teaching me some stuff, and they all wanted to pretend they were going to school, and so now we all have homework. What's the assignment? I have to do a bunch of multiplication problems, and they have to write their names 10 times. Wow. Well, I'm looking at these papers, and I have to say, you all are doing a great job. And it's okay that Nate's brain is made different from ours because he's still our brother, and we still love him, Noah said. Yeah, but sometimes he's mean, Abe said. I am not. You just don't understand. Shelley raised her eyebrows. Be kind, everyone, and no more talking until everyone is finished with their assignment. Then you can go watch young Eric train. She smiled at Jojo and Jake. They're out on the beach if you want to join them. Are your parents coming tonight? No, ma'am. Mom's not feeling too well. Morning sickness, I guess. And I was supposed to tell you first thing that Uncle Joey is working late and Aunt Breeze is going to stay home. She's tired. I understand. The guys headed out and stood on the deck looking down at the beach. Young Eric and Grandmaster Keno were working on powerful kicking techniques. It seemed they were working on if young Eric were to fall forward, turning his fall into a Mailoa de Compresso kick using the heel for impact. They also were using some Muay Thai and Taekwondo. They watched for a few minutes until young Eric sank to his knees in exhaustion, and then they made their way down. Jojo stopped by the cooler, pulled out a bottle of water, and handed it to young Eric as he approached. Young Eric didn't speak, but accepted the bottle and drank. When he caught his breath, he forced himself to stand and smiled at Jake. Good to see you, Jake, he said. Jake shook his hand. I'd hug you, but you're pretty gross right now. Young Eric laughed. Understood. Jojo turned to his grandfather and bowed. Hey, Granddad. Jojo, Eric bowed. Grandmaster Keno, Jake said as he too bowed. Jake, Eric said with a smile and a bow. Good to see you, son. Eric looked the 2 boys over. So, though he's gross right now, can I talk the 2 of you into going a few rounds with him? Jojo nodded. As long as he doesn't hurt me, I got to play next Saturday. Young Eric laughed. I don't think you have to worry about that. And I have to deploy in 2 weeks. He can't hurt me either, Jake said. And you can't hurt him because he has to fight in the challenge in about 6 weeks. He's the 3rd Dan, right? Getting ready to be the 4th Dan is what I heard. And I'm a 2nd Dan. He'll pulverize me. Yeah, but you're a highly trained Special Forces operative. Your problem will be to fight him without killing him. Jojo pulled off his shoes and shirt. I'm in. Come on, little Eric. Let's see what you got. Eric Sr. smiled as he thought Jojo was about to be surprised. So what I say goes. Listen to me. I'll stop the fight if I think anyone might be in danger. This is not full fight. No hands or tape. No lethal punches. Jojo nodded as he warmed up and stretched out. A few minutes later, they squared off. Grandmaster Keno nodded in approval as young Eric put Jojo down time after time, sometimes with kicks, sometimes with takedowns. Jojo barely landed a punch, and Eric finally called the match. Jojo shook his head. Young Eric, man, oh man, you have gotten tough. You are going to kill it out there in November. Well, he's not ready yet, but he's getting there, Eric Sr. said. And in your defense, young Eric added, you haven't trained since football started back up in August. And in your defense, Grandmaster Keno added, you were going easy on him for that reason. Eric, Jake said, that was impressive. Your turn, Grandmaster Keno said. Are you in? Yes, sir. I may be about to die, but my competitive self won't let me turn this down. He took off his shoes and socks and shirt and began stretching and warming up while young Eric rested. Young Eric looked over his opponent. He was bigger than just a month ago when he'd last seen him. His chest was bulging with muscle, and he knew about the maneuvers they went on carrying over 50 pounds, so they were in shape, and their legs were powerful. Block his kicks at all costs, young Eric thought. Grandmaster Keno watched young Eric's face, knowing he was sizing up Jake, and he nodded in approval. When they squared off, they both held back. Young Eric blocked everything Jake threw at him, punches and kicks, and finally young Eric spun and kicked Jake in the chest, and Jake flew backward. He recovered quickly, and now the real fight was on. Jake had to force himself to stop throat punches, but he still got in several hits, both with fists and feet. Young Eric did the same, but he was moving quick, like his father. Realizing that Jake might not be quite as fast as him, he worked on quick strikes and moves, and finally found an opening and kicked to the forehead, and Jake went down. Eric Sr. called the fight. Young Eric immediately went to hold his hand out to Jake, and Jake allowed him to pull him up. Good job, Eric, Jake said. Jojo's right. You are going to kick butt. I really wish I could see it. We'll make a recording for you, young Eric said. Jake, Grandmaster Keno began, don't feel like Eric bested you. He didn't. You were at a huge disadvantage. Really? What was that? Well, we joke that you can fight young Eric but don't kill him, but really it's not a joke. Your training in hand-to-hand combat is not to score a point. It's to permanently disable the threat. And Eric took advantage of that. He knew you were focused on not hurting him. Young Eric smiled. That's why Cam won't spar with me. He doesn't want to even practice not killing. He can't get it confused with his real-life scenarios. Well, we Marines have to practice against each other without killing each other, but it is different because even if we have to fight that close, we're still trying to fire a gun. He smiled. And I do know that I'm at a disadvantage. I once asked my father how to subdue someone without hurting them, and he decided it's almost impossible. Who were you trying to subdue? Lena Bug. They all thought a moment and then nodded in agreement. He laughed. Anyway, now I'm all sweaty and sandy. I'm going to go in and see if I can get cleaned up. Me too, Jojo said. Young Eric turned to his grandfather with a hopeful look on his face. You're dismissed, Eric Sr. said. Young Eric bowed. Thank you, sir. He turned, grabbed the cooler, and headed up to the house. I'll come get the equipment in a minute, he called back over his shoulder. I've got it. You go ahead. Yes, sir. Eric Keno walked around, picking up kicking pads and sweat towels and placed them in the large canvas bag that held a multitude of other training supplies. He lifted the bag and pulled the strap over his shoulder and turned and looked out to sea, as he often did. Walking forward, he touched his feet into the water and looked west to where he'd been born, to where God had sent a messenger to reveal himself to him. He wondered how many other people on the earth right now had received similar messengers. Surely he wasn't the only one. There had to be others. Suddenly, Eric had a burning desire to find them, or to find at least one of them, someone else who'd had the same experience. He decided he'd begin research on that very soon. Turning away from his island, he headed up to the house, and once he stepped inside the glass doors, it was chaos. Several of the children were crying. Nate was on the floor, literally throwing a fit, and Shelley was gathering pencils and papers and arguing back and forth with Angelina. Jeffy was standing looking like she might break into tears any moment. What in the world is going on? Eric demanded. Shelley stopped arguing with her young daughter and turned to him. Her lips trembled, but then she raised her chin, a defiant thing she did that Eric truly loved. You ended training early. And I promised the children that when they finished their assignments, I'd take them out and let them watch you train young Eric. I see. He looked apologetic. I'm sorry, Shelley, I didn't know. She nodded. Well, I didn't think to tell you once I made the promise. It's my fault. No, it's not. No blame. This is a good thing. He drew a breath. Stop crying and be quiet this instant, he said firmly and a little louder than he usually spoke in order to be heard over the roar. The children all looked up at him, slightly startled. When Nate saw it was his father who said it, he started immediately to go back to crying, but Eric made a short staccato sound in his throat. Ah! And Nate stopped again. That's enough of that, Eric said firmly. Move your little butt and sit at the table with your siblings. When he didn't move, Eric raised his brows. Now. Slowly, Nate pulled himself up and went to his seat. Not a word from any of you until I speak to you. But not one word, unless you'd like to go sit in your room for the rest of the evening. Eric then turned and smiled at Jeffy. Come here. She came to him. She was trembling. He hugged her. You're going to have to do a better job of blocking that out. You let all of that in, didn't you? Not on purpose. It just hit me, and once it did, it was like an avalanche. Deep breath, baby girl. And go sit down at the table, too, because I want you to see how to handle this. Open yourself to me only. He then turned to his wife. Are you okay? She nodded. Kind of takes me back to when Mark and Joey were little. I had a very hard time trying to get them to give me respect until you came into our lives. He nodded and then turned back to the children. Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. First, your mother and I love you very much. Second, arguing, crying, and throwing a fit to get what you want will never work. Not ever. Not only will it not work, but from this day forward, it will get you a punishment. I'm very disappointed in you that you would treat your mother like this, yell at her, and argue with her. But she promised, Nathaniel, I have not given you permission to speak yet. Until then, you keep your mouth closed. Your mouth closed. He looked at the others. Your mother promised, but she wasn't able to get word to me. She had no idea that I would end training early, and I didn't know that she'd promised. If you had behaved and been kind to your mother, she would have told me the problem, and we could have gotten young Eric back down there to help me train you a little bit. So, you see, it could have been fixed. But instead, you chose to dishonor your mother, to treat her badly, simply because you didn't get your way. Again, and listen very carefully, disrespect toward your mom will never be allowed in this house. You will be obedient to her. You will be kind to her. You will show her love and honor at all times, even when you don't like what she's saying. Angelina, is that understood? She sniffed and nodded. Yes, sir, she said in her adorable tiny little voice. Noah? Yes, sir. Abraham? He sniffed. Yes, sir. Emmanuel? Manny nodded. Yes, sir. He raised his eyebrows at Nate. Nathaniel? The boy frowned. You better think real hard about what you want to do or say right now, Nate. I know your brain works differently. I know you have a logic that needs to be worked out. Let me tell you this right now. Your genius brain does not make you better than your brothers and sisters. Just ask Jeffy. It makes you different, but not better and not worse. It gives you an advantage sometimes, and sometimes it makes things much harder for you. You have to learn how to function in this world and how to be kind and how to have respect for others. And you'd better learn real quick right now, because I'm about to give you a long time to think about what I'm saying. But if I'm smarter than you, then, Shelley gasped, and Eric put his hand out toward her. It's okay. Nate, you really like young Eric, don't you? Yes. Why? Because we both like numbers. But how can you like him when you're smarter than him? I'm not smarter than him. He teaches me things about numbers. Because you're very young, he still knows a lot more than you. But one day, you'll pass him, and you'll know more than him. Will you still like him when you know more than him? Yes. Why? Because I like him. Right. It doesn't really matter that you will know more than him. He's your nephew, your brother Ricky's son. and you'll always like him. And I'm thinking you'll always love him. Nate only nodded his head. Do you love your mother? Yes. Why? Because, I don't know. I guess because she's so nice and she takes good care of us and teaches us stuff and gives us food and helps us and reads to us and sings with us and plays with us. Good. Mothers are awesome like that. They love their children. That's why they do all those things for them. Right now, your mom knows how to take care of you, how to cook for you, how to drive you around in the car. But one day, you'll know all those things, and you won't need her anymore. Will you stop loving her then? He frowned as the light began to go on. No. Okay, listen, everyone, to what I'm going to say. I realize that you all won't understand everything I'm talking about, but I'd rather talk above you than below you, so just listen. And later, when we go to bed tonight, you can tell me if you understand what I'm talking about. Every single one of us has different things that we're good at. I'm a good teacher. Your sister, Jeffy, she's a good doctor, martial artist, dancer, and healer. Young Eric is good with numbers, martial arts, singing, dancing, surfing, sports. Your mother is good at a whole bunch of things, martial arts, gardening, singing, dancing, loving. You're so young, we don't even know all the things you're going to be good at. So for now, while you're a child, you will listen to your parents, honor your parents, and obey your parents, even though one day you will probably know more than us about some things, but not about all things. There's more to living this life than just being smart. So you have to learn how to get along with others, how to love, how to be kind, how to help, and how to serve others. That's why we're here. Eric stopped and looked at all the upturned faces and had to smile. That's enough for today. So, Nathaniel, answer the question. Do you understand that you will honor and obey your mother even when you don't agree with what she says? Yes. Excuse me? Yes, sir. Eric smiled. Good. Now, because you all chose to be so disrespectful to your mother just now. Hold on. Now, because you all chose to be so disrespectful to your mother just now, we will not be going down to the beach and show you any martial arts. What you will do is help put away your papers and pencils and go up to your room, and listen to Noah read his new book to you. You will be kind if he doesn't know a word, and you will help him if he needs help. But first, you will each go and apologize to your mother and give her a hug and tell her that you love her. He nodded. Go. The children moved quickly. He watched carefully to make sure no one disobeyed or was not repentant. And when they'd all gone upstairs, Shelley smiled up at her husband. Thank you. My pleasure. I mean, it made me angry to see how they were treating you, and I had to push that aside and find my logical self. It was a good exercise for me, too. Shelley giggled. Of course you would see it that way. He pulled her to him. Are you okay? I am, just a little tired. You need help making dinner? No, it's pretty much all done. Eric sniffed. Spaghetti? Yes, and some salad, and some garlic bread, and some ice cream, simple and easy. I'm going to go clean up. Been sweating out there on the beach. When the boys come back down from their showers, get them to help you. I'm sure they'd love to help. She smiled. I will. 20 minutes later, the three young men sat freshly showered at the kitchen table after having set the table for dinner and sat listening to Jake tell about his first deployment and then talking about how different the coming deployment was going to be. Young Eric glanced at his phone when it buzzed, and he smiled. Good news? Jake asked. Eric grinned. Jordan's here. He stood and went to the front door, and Jake looked at Jojo. So, is this getting serious? Oh, yeah, they're like totally in love. Eric has even mentioned marriage to me in passing, but for him to even say the word is way serious. I think they've even discussed it. Wow, I mean, that's fast. From what I understand, you and Lena were talking about it within a few weeks of you being home. Yeah, but we've known each other our whole lives. True, Jojo shrugged. But you know how, like, some things are just meant to be? Jake nodded. I do know. Young Eric opened the front door and went down the steps to grab Jordan's overnight bag. He shook Agent Trout's hand. Thanks again. Trout shook his head. Stop that. It's my job. He nodded at Jordan. Miss Brooks, see you at 7 in the morning. Thanks, Agent Trout. Have fun at your appointment. Yeah, thanks. Young Eric took Jordan's hand. Hey, 2-3. Hey, 3. He got inside the door, put her bag down, pushed her against the front door and kissed her, softly at first and then harder. She winced when he placed his hands on her shoulders. He pulled away and raised the sleeve on her right shoulder. That doesn't look real good. I know, it's pretty sore. I'm going to ask Jeffy to look at it. Jordan nodded, making Eric frown. If she didn't argue with him, then it must be hurting her pretty bad. He smiled. So, come on in and see Jake. Jake, the Marine guy who married the beautiful red-headed Lena, right? Yes, he's just here until the morning. He's going to be at Camp Pendleton for 2 more weeks of training, and then he's getting deployed. Oh, that's sad. How long will he be gone? Don't know. Let's ask him. They went into the kitchen. Jeffy was at the sink washing cucumbers and tomatoes, and Jojo and Jake both stood. Aunt Jeffy, young Eric said immediately, will you take a look at Jordan's shoulder sometime tonight? Absolutely, she assured him. Jojo moved forward and kissed Jordan's cheek. It's good to see you, Jordan. She grinned. I love being able to say that I got kissed by the USC quarterback. He laughed. Oh, yeah. It's such a treat. That's why all the girls are lining up to date me. Not. Why is that, Jojo? Because he won't give them the time of day, young Eric said. Oh, he's a snob. I get it now. She turned to smile at Jake. Jordan, you remember Jake Apple? He took her hand. It's nice to see you again, Jordan. So you decided to give this guy a chance, huh? Or he decided to give me one. Stop, young Eric commanded. He rolled his eyes. She shrugged. So, tell me again, how do you guys know each other? Our families are close, Jake said. My mom and dad used to take martial arts classes from Grandmaster Kino when they were teenagers. That's how they met. Then eventually my dad went into the Marines and he was in Afghanistan with with Keegan Tanner. Jordan nodded. Who is Gabe's dad? Right. He's your uncle? Well, not actually. They've lived next door to us in Pine Forest my whole life. So he's Uncle Keegan to me. My mom and dad left Cali to go to Georgia to open the Pine Forest Inn, and then when Keegan Tanner had some trouble, my father invited him to come to Pine Forest. And that trouble that had to do with why Gabe was kidnapped last spring. Right. Anyway, Uncle Keegan reached out to my dad when all that happened, and my dad put him in touch with Jason Lee, and that got the attention of young Eric's dad, who wanted to step in to help Uncle Keegan. It's all a big, long story. Bottom line, we all started getting together, and now it's like we're all family. Well, that part doesn't surprise me because it seems that's what these people do, adopt people into their family. Young Eric shrugged. The more the merrier. Well, family, Shelley said, dinner is ready. Young Eric, will you and Jordan go get the kids? Will do. And your grandfather? Yes, ma'am. He grabbed up Jordan's bag and they headed upstairs. And that is the end of chapter 29.